Good afternoon. Today it's my great pleasure to welcome the leaders of Trust Tairāwhiti, Gavin Murphy, CEO, and Richard Searle. Kia ora. And Richard Searle, who is GM of Commercial, I think is your title, Richard.
That's right. Kia ora.
Yep. Welcome, Gavin, Richard. For those of you in the audience who may not know much about Trust Tairāwhiti, formerly Activate Tairāwhiti, it is an EDA based in the Gisborne region, and is far from typical, either in terms of its governance structure or its funding. And just because it is a little different, I'm going to break with tradition here a little bit and ask our guests to share with us how TT operates before we dive into some of the harder hitting questions around the economic impact of COVID-19. Gavin, Richard, who wants to take that question?
Well, that's probably me, Susan. Kia ora koutou, thanks for having us. Yeah, so as Susan said, we're a little bit different. Our genesis, our whakapapa actually comes out of the energy trusts of the region and the deregulation of the electricity sector post the Bradford reforms. And so the trust started as a community trust, owning the lines company here, and through the trust support as 100% shareholder of the lines company, that company was able to grow and build up quite a reasonable sized regional infrastructure company spanning the port here, the lines company, some geothermal generation and other generation businesses. And so now has assets, nearly $700 million worth of assets, and the trust's equity in that company has grown. As a result, the trust was able to grow its capacity and capability, and historically started as a trust granting and distributing money in that much more philanthropic community sense, but over time realised the need for the Tairāwhiti region to have a strong and focused sort of economic development capability in region. The trustee very much provided for that anyway, but hadn't historically delivered much in that space. Worked with the council who did have some activity in that space, the Chamber of Commerce and other partners, and so that EDA activity under a joint arrangement with council, which was Activate Tairāwhiti, was born sitting under the Eastland Community Trust. As that grew, it took on the challenge of tourism as well for the region, the regional tourism operator activities, and the breadth and scope of the activity it was doing, including the things like the regional business partner, capital investment directly from trust assets into sectors in the region, as well as a strong community focus. And the trust funding resources being substantive compared with the council as another partner who had a lot of other demands, meant we ultimately rolled that all into one and became Trust Tairāwhiti. So Trust Tairāwhiti we see ourselves as a regional development agency. We distribute, invest either directly with capital or with operating activities into community, to economic development, including tourism. And financial year just finished, to give you a sense of that, we distributed or invested $17 million into the Tairāwhiti region across direct capital investments, substantial investment into the operations of economic development and tourism, marketing, etc., and into sort of traditional community group funding and community infrastructure support. So that's the background, but certainly a large part of that is the economic development focus of the trust.
Fabulous. And did I hear right? You said 17 million?
That's right, 17 Aroha Noa. We've got some activity happening out in front of us in the boardroom. Yes, 17 million in the last year,
yep.
The financial year to March 2020. And it was a similar level, I forget the number exactly, that the year before. Yeah.
And that was comprised of a mix of distributions of the community groups and direct investments by the trust.
Well, I think you've very rapidly become the envy of the whole network. It's amazing. So I'm guessing capacity isn't one of the issues that you're facing at the moment. resources in terms of human resources?
And we'll get on to COVID, I guess, in a minute. But you know, this region certainly, and it's a fantastic region. It's one of the great growing regions of the country and has a lot to offer. But it certainly has a lot of challenges. So you know, there is a lot of demand in this community for the resources the trust can bring to bear, and you know, the economy, while having done particularly well on the back of primary production in the last few years, and probably come through COVID better than many, doesn't have a huge diversity of sectors in it. So it's off a relatively small base that the region has economically, rates, etc., etc. So while we have a capacity and resource, there's certainly need for it in the region. In terms of human resource, I think we've got great people. We've grown quite a lot in the last few years, but certainly the challenge in front of us is getting a good group of skilled people in the team who can discharge that responsibility or that accountability we have for the region, the beneficiaries of our region around the trust fund, the trust resource, and doing that well. And that's always a challenge to find the mix of people who can operate across, you know, capital investment, equity and debt and other funding mechanisms, detailed operations and all of the traditional EDA work, as well as understand the various communities of this region and those needs and work with them. So I think, like probably all of our peers, the right people doing good work is always a challenge for any organisation.
For sure. So you touched a little bit on the economy, the regional economy. What is your pre-COVID-19? What is your economy, your unemployment levels, your demographic? What did that look like in your region?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, I mean, the Tairāwhiti region is a truly bicultural region. It's, you know, more than 50% Māori populations. Population's probably about 50,000, or a little bit over. A very strong primary production growing region. So, farming, forestry, fishing, horticulture, the strong drivers of the economy here. Certainly had a strong period of growth in most of those sectors in the last few years. Forestry probably had been starting to slow down the back half of last year. Strong export-focused economy, and had enjoyed a period of, I'd say, reasonably steady and good growth. I guess the challenge on the other side of that is we've got one of the highest unemployment rates in the region, and a group of our community who have missed out on the opportunity that the economic growth has had in the region, and some sectors that hadn't grown or we hadn't diversified into in our economy like other regions had enjoyed, although that said, tourism, for example, had probably grown beyond regional capacity and capability, and are now actually seeing the downside effects of that in COVID. So, you know, we had been focusing on diversifying the economy. We had made a specific intervention in tourism to try and grow our share of that from a pretty low base and a value proposition in there. We had also intervened in wood processing to try and create diversity of product, of productivity, of margin and market by way of increasing wood processing here over log export. So we're on those pathways, but we have around 5,000 young people or young adults, young people through to young adults who hadn't been in training or employment or education throughout that, what appears on the surface to be a good period of economic stability and growth, and some interventions we're trying to make we actually have a large chunk of our population who had missed out on what should have been a good opportunity. And so our focus was increasingly turning to trying to understand and solve that problem in terms of opportunities for them and development. And when COVID came along, it only reinforced, from our perspective, while it had some immediate impacts which flowed through, and the country's all well understood what those are. When we actually looked at COVID and the impacts here, they caused individual concern and exacerbated that issue. But in truth, we already had a large group of people who were missing out on the opportunity in this region already. And yes, COVID has made it a bit worse, but actually it's reaffirmed for us that the issues we'd identify and the opportunities we were trying to address as a region, as a collective, and it's very much not just the trust at all, were the right ones when we reflected upon the impact of COVID and what it could have and what it has ended up looking like, meaning at the moment, and it's still very much something we're all moving to continue to understand. It really reaffirmed that the issues we've identified about log export markets, lack of wood processing product, needing to diversify our economy into more sectors, etc. A large group of our community who were missing out on all of those opportunities full stop, and were steps behind the rest of this region. They're all fundamental things we needed to address before COVID, and they remain fundamental things for us to address post-COVID.
So as a region, COVID-19 hasn't impacted upon you as greatly as it has on many of the other regions. I think you were identified as a surge region under the PGF, and I think then after COVID-19 hit, you received some funding to help the forestry sector within your region.
Yes, we did, and it's probably for the region. One of the things in COVID was it really accelerated and reinforced and in a unique way really improved regional relationships. So the region came together more than it had been pre-COVID, and the collective regional response, of which the Trust was only a small part relative to the civil defence activities led out of council, a really strong iwi collective response in this region, looking after the communities, our communities in the region. The coming together of all the parties around COVID was one of the better things coming out of a terrible situation. And one of the things that we did early on was, when COVID started to roll out and the impact was in China, and so our export market in China was locked down and this country was still operating, we felt those effects first here in the forestry sector, or we could see those effects coming through the forestry sector, and that was sort of leading the country in terms of impact from China flowing straight through to our forestry sector. And so we were able to come together as a region and quite quickly identify the issue because of the work we were already doing, the relationships we had in the region. As a region, we were able to identify the problem and seek that government intervention early. So a bit over $20 million did flow here into region to support redeployment of those that we anticipated losing their jobs as a result of forestry and trying to slow down. And so that was good, and that was a lot to do with regional collaboration as much as anything. Ironically, as it then rolled out, this country went into lockdown, and so those effects flowed substantially across the country, and a whole lot more interventions happened subsequent to that. And then our market in China came out of lockdown while we were still in lockdown, and so the forestry sector, while there has been a number of people who have lost their jobs, and so that redeployment fund is active and live. regional collaboration has meant we're looking at wider opportunities to see how that fund can best be used. We helped collaborate to get that fund in, but the hard work of subsequent to that has been done between the Provincial Growth Fund, the Council, the Forestry Sector, Wood Council and others. So
yeah.
The Trust was a good facilitator, but we've not, other parties have gone on and done the hard work around that.
That was one of the questions I was going to ask you, because some of the other regions have suggested that in seeking PGF monies and planning for expenditure of PGF monies, they had formed a wider collaboration than they ever had before, and that in some ways that prepared them quite well for COVID-19.
Yes, I think that would be our experience also. And I think the PGF mechanism was used because it had been established by government for the surge region, so quite some time before. So the redeployment package was identified by the region, and the Provincial Growth Fund was there, so it was the most sensible mechanism to use. So in many ways, having the relationships, having the Provincial Growth Fund meant standing that up and deploying the money became much more straightforward than had the region not had the collaboration it had, and had government not had the PGF for other reasons. I think the mechanism of then responding to COVID in the short term until the government did stand up a more comprehensive COVID response would have been harder. And we've certainly, Richard, the Provincial Growth Fund, the surge nature of our, being identified as a surge region, and the work that Richard's been leading in our investment around wood processing last year, so well before COVID, certainly stood us in good stead for what we're needing to do now.
And the PGF requirements around regional endorsement of projects, so coming together to consider them holistically, and consultation with iwi and the like, and some of those requirements have put us in good stead to work together on these things in the COVID response.
Yeah, and it's a similar story to what I'm hearing. So yes, you touched earlier on how in many ways COVID-19 has just reinforced your understanding of the needs of your region. Has it suggested to you that you needed to go back and revisit your strategic plan, or does it still stand up? Does it still hold water?
I don't think COVID-19 has sort of forced us or required us to do that. We, ironically, we're in the process of revisiting and updating our strategic plan from a broader perspective. So the Trust, with its full mandate, including a strong focus on economic development, but not only, was well down the track across both a significant piece of research and then a broad body of community engagement. We're very close to finalising a wellbeing framework as a framework for investment across all of the ways and domains we operate, including the sort of economic development components, if you like. And so we were just in the throes of finishing He Tohu Order, our Tairāwhiti regional wellbeing framework, which would have encompassed the economy, communities, and all of those components in a single frame. And as a result, a revised strategy was sort of coming from our perspective anyway. So that piece of work is still ongoing, and that's where our focus has been around I guess, refreshing the strategic plan as the next step. And certainly COVID and any learnings will come into that, but we were sort of down that pathway anyway. I think off the top of my head, I would say that the COVID response and the regional collaboration will just make us consider more carefully the collaborative regional partnerships we already had. We'll have really good relationships and partnerships, but how we do more in that space around our strategies and how our strategic thinking should link to others is probably where COVID will give us cause to say we can do even more or even better.
So what, during both the response and your strategic planning for recovery, what would you say has been the biggest challenge for you as an organisation and for your region?
Oh, that's a good question.
Oh, good.
I think possibly, you know, when something like COVID comes along, and the old phrase, you know, never waste a good crisis. I guess the reaction to or some of the reaction around this is the massive step change we need, and the desire, excuse me, to really use that to create huge change or paradigm shift, which I think is valid in places, is there. But actually, in the first instance, just getting back to work, getting everybody back into employment and sort of things as normal and usual is kind of the immediate priority. And so the challenge of those in the community and wanting to make substantive change as a result of this crisis versus the get back to work, actually, you know, employment and getting paid again and getting the economy and the community going as it was. But those two tensions were there, and I think remain there. Our original recovery plan, Rotuputo Order, had a whole lot of partners all trying to collaborate all over Zoom to create the plan, which was challenging in itself. A whole lot of different perspectives that were trying to be brought together quickly, and there think I remains a challenge for those of us with responsibilities in the region to our communities to bridge the gap between getting going again and new and change and taking opportunity and taking the recovery efforts we did do in lockdown under a civil defence framework and broadening those to a truly engaged community plan. And that I think we were challenged in doing a good job of that. And we were only one of a number of participants. So it's the collective challenge. And how we make those lives and evolve, live plans, live documents, and those evolve in conjunction with our communities, as opposed to staying plans that those of us that could put together, you know, when others were just trying to survive. I think that's the biggest challenge from my perspective. I don't know if you've got, Richard, anything to add to that? But
no, certainly that tension exists in the immediacy of a response vis-a-vis the visionary sort of opportunity for change.
Yeah,
certainly where the challenge lay.
Yeah, and I think not forgetting that opportunity for change and hanging on to some bold activities, as well as actually just getting ourselves all back into employment and getting our economy moving. That remains the challenge, I think.
Yeah, I think that's been the challenge for all of the profession. It's having to do some strategic planning in a crisis under very unusual circumstances, and it's had one foot in the future, trying to build resilience so that whatever the next economic shock is, and we need to be not in denial, there will be another one at some time, that we're better prepared for it, more resilient.
Yes, I think, you know, we got a glimpse of that when our largest market was closed for a period of time, and you know, there's a whole lot of, you know, not great outcomes, but that not lasting very long, and then being able to get back into business with that market certainly made the impact here a lot less significant than it could have been. So, you know, we shouldn't forget the glimpses we got of what could have been, as opposed to at the moment, and it is touch wood, you know, what appears to be. That's being alert to that is important, I think.
So one of the other aspects, other challenges that has been shared with me is the lack of real-time data on which to base a strategy. Is that something that Trust Tairāwhiti struggled with, or did you have some primary research of your own that you could rely on, or did you just, you know, have such a good ear to the ground that you could via surveys and so on, that you could you could understand what was happening for yourselves?
We had, I think, Richard, our relationships in ear to the ground meant that we could stand up or formalise surveys and data, local insightful data very, very quickly. I think we did find we were exposed to not having good data sets, good information processes, regular data and information processes out of a more, a national data set, for want of a better word. But
so we're able to sort of leverage our good connectivity, but it was being agile around working out what we needed to capture and how, and then what we were going to do with it as well. So we were able to reach out pretty effectively, I think, at short notice. It certainly presented some challenges
and reinforced some gaps we should have had around that local sort of survey and insights that we were capturing ad hoc along the way. But we had to work quite hard to get some stuff quickly to provide insight to regional parties. That said, we did. You talked about the early funding we got through the PGF, but it was really the government's very first foray into the response when COVID first emerged in the world, and it was China-centred, and therefore China closed its borders, and so our log export forestry sector sort of ceased or stopped work pretty quickly. The fact that we had good relationships and sort of economic insights and understanding around that, we were able to turn around, in a day, a data-based local business insight sort of document to support the regional parties, and in fact, our local MP did a great job of getting that in front of Cabinet and the subsequent decisions that followed, and so we were able to do it in some sectors to support things like that funding through Cabinet and through the provincial growth funds, criteria very, very quickly. So I think what we've recognised is a need for a better set across all of the, not only, but all of the economy as an example, which is most interest, I guess, to this discussion. Having that broadly across all the full regional economic set is something we're now working on, isn't it?
Yeah, to establish that, or having established a baseline of a number of measures to continue to collect and gather it, so that we're better positioned for the next challenge that comes along.
Well, one of the challenges we face here, and I don't know if other regions face it, but the Tairāwhiti is a small population relative to the country, so a lot of the data where it's captured by survey, where it's national survey data, the sample size is so small as to be meaningless to this region. The alternative is a lot of this national statistics pulled together. We're lumped in with the Hawke's Bay, and we love our Hawke's Bay whananga, but the issue, some of the issues are the same, but some of them are quite different. We're sometimes lumped in with the Bay of Plenty. So having a data set that represents Tairāwhiti is not something that is nationally. They don't collect national data thinking about what's best for the Tairāwhiti, whereas obviously that's we're entirely selfish around that. So one of the challenges we've always known about, and part of our wellbeing framework we're working towards anyway, but COVID and this discussion reinforced is data that is regionally specific for this region and not aggregated up into sort of broader East Coast or East Coast Bay of Plenty data. Yeah. And I'm not sure. I imagine other regions, some of whom have that challenge, some who are big enough and strong enough, or perhaps they don't, but that's certainly a challenge for us.
Yeah, and it is in other of the smaller populations as well. It just doesn't drop down to that TA level effectively.
No.
So just a final question for you both. What is the one thing, the one lasting impression that you will take away with you when you talk about COVID-19 in 10 years, 20 years time? What is the one thing that you will say, look, this was absolutely fantastic, that this grew out of COVID-19, this is what we did, or this was an absolute disaster and we were so overwhelmingly challenged because. What's the what's the main message if your grandchildren ask you in 10 or 20 years' time about this time? What would you say to them?
That's another good question.
It turned our workplace on its head. I know that because we hadn't traditionally done a lot of, and I'm sure this is the same for many, many organisations through New Zealand, but we hadn't done a lot of working from home, or we had our contingency plans, but nothing that envisaged anything like what we were faced with.
Yeah.
And so we had to, in very short order, like the rest of New Zealand, mobilise ourselves and figure out a new way of working. And I think from our team, you know, we've got a range of teams that had to come together and continue to work. And so I think how we got on and got that done was probably the single biggest takeaway that we had. We were faced with an enormous number of challenges. We were looked to regionally by quite a number of parties, and we were just trying to figure out how
we were as frantic as they were. We couldn't know that.
So yeah, that will be the thing that I look back on and say, actually, we pulled that off to some extent, and were able to function reasonably effectively through that whole process.
While being looked to be having significant regional leadership input. So, I mean, my response to that would be just a caveat at the front end of that we're in a pretty privileged position in the sense that the trust has resources. You know, our conversations were not about business or community survivability. You know, we were in a region where you know, the health response was good, but the impact was looking least. You know, the health impact, at least early on, was looking least critical, and we weren't having to grapple with a lot of really challenging business survivability questions that a lot of businesses and you know, mum and dad businesses and corporates would have faced. So I think it's important to caveat all this with that we were in a bit of a privileged position that we weren't having to grapple with really fundamental issues. And then from my perspective, with that said, I think Richard's insight, it's a great one. From my perspective, when I look back on it in the future and talk to the grandkids about it, I think it will be about why it is we let ourselves get so busy and so head up in the way we were doing things, and how much we could do in a different way in lockdown with technology, and how much time. Certainly, we found, and I don't know if that's because of this region and where we are, but we could get a lot done, and it still seemed to be there was a lot more time available as well. So we're sort of back being busy again. I've been asking myself for the last couple of weeks why that is, why we haven't necessarily held on to some of the good things about lockdown. And then I think the other great thing from my perspective is just that regional collaboration, and I see next week Tairāwhiti iwi are hosting a regional summit around Rotupu Rawora, our regional response plan, and sort of discussion about COVID, and probably some of the reflections you've touched on here. The regional collaboration and the regional leadership shown by iwi as key organisations and partners in the region was impressive there. The reach that they have, and it's probably slightly unique to, not unique, but this region is one of the ones where it will be most visible. The reach and connection that those organisations have, and the partnership we need to have with them around making the most for this region. That to me was quite powerful to see in action. And I think it's caused us to reflect on how that part, you know, how we can support that partnership more. That there's a lot of opportunity to really grow as a region out of the partnership and collaboration that came about during COVID.
Yeah, it sounds to me like you've had some really good things happen there that are worth really focusing on and amplifying going forwards. Almost like this is the watershed for collaboration. It's the watershed for the way we work, for being more productive, etc., etc. So
Yeah, I think we've held on to the collaboration bit. I'm not sure about the you know, the busyness and production one. So that's probably go away and work on that one.
Look, it sounds to me like Gisborne's a place to be.
Oh, absolutely the place to be.
Yeah, it has reinforced that.
Yeah, we're very happy in our splendid isolation with the first to see the light, and yeah, it wasn't a bad place to be. We do recognise the privilege of that. I mean, as a region within a country that was pretty privileged from the leadership shown and the, you know, where we are in the scheme of what you're seeing in terms of headlines out there in the news at the moment. So
yeah, absolutely. Hey, just before I go, I will just share with you the fact that EDANS is running an online congress between the 7th and the 11th. So that's 5 days congress between the 7th and 11th of September. And that we've got speakers from all over the country talking on different facets of COVID-19, from the impact through to recovery plans and focus going forward, the woes, the wows, the challenges, what we've learned. So keep an eye open for that, because I know you'll want your team to be a part of that.
really.
And finally, can I thank you both for your time, because I know you're both busy, more busy, more busy than you were ever before. Thank you so much. It's been a very insightful tour of your region and your EDA. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, Susan.
Yeah.